Welcome to the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health's Conversations Over Coffee video series. My name is Pearlyn, and I am the Research and Knowledge Exchange Coordinator for the Center. And joining us today is Jennifer Gillies. Thanks for coming in, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for having me.
Jennifer is the Associate Director of Accessibility Services at the University of Waterloo, and we are here today to pick her brain and chat a bit about campus mental health from the perspective of accessibility services.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I noticed is that the name of your department is actually capitalized to read as AccessAbility Services, and I found that very interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, when our office changed its name from the Office for Persons with Disabilities to Accessibility Services, there was consultation with students and staff and other campus community members, and that name was chosen as many found it to be very empowering and really putting the focus on the abilities and not just the disabilities. So how can we help build capacity? How can we help support people? It's very similar to some of the language that you might see in terms of disability as well, in capitalizing the A in disability, which although many people feel very comfortable with and very empowered by that kind of language, there are also some who might not find it as empowering as they might find it in some ways. Kind of maybe dismissing the disability culture as well. And for some, being part of that disability culture is part of their identity. And so not wanting to minimize that, but wanting to accentuate it. But I think that just helps to also illustrate the complexity of disability, that it's not just, one perspective. We're talking about all humans with different perspectives and different opinions on something. And our name is no different in that.
Absolutely. So in the last couple of years, mental health challenges are on the rise everywhere you look at the data. So how do you think the nature of the work at Accessibility Services has changed to reflect that?
Yeah, I mean, we know that there are more people with disabilities entering university in terms of there being removed barriers and removed stigma in terms of people feeling more comfortable seeking support. So we know that there's more people with disabilities in university, and we know there's more people who are coming forward with a mental health disability who are seeking support. So it has changed offices like ours that primarily we're focusing on removing physical barriers, using adaptive technologies, and for students with physical sensory disabilities. Yeah, this has changed it in terms of almost half of our student population identifies primarily as having a mental health disability as a primary disability of theirs. So it does create a little bit of complexities in terms of their condition might be more episodic. And so it might be more challenging to just say, okay, this is the plan going forward. We have a wheelchair ramp and now it's accessible. It requires us to be a bit more creative. It requires faculty also to be a lot more flexible. And it can be challenging, I think, for some when disabilities are invisible to really know how to help. And when you're seeing somebody who's having difficulty, accessing a door, it's easy to jump in and offer help. But I think it can be challenging when they don't see the disability. They see someone who looks well, and it can be challenging for an instructor to know exactly how to help. And for offices like ours to ensure that we are finding solutions that are flexible, that are going to change as the individual's experience is changing, and to be a bit more creative with the accommodations and the supports.
So do you think there are systemic barriers across the sector that students with mental health disabilities, mental health challenges are facing that are different from students with physical challenges?
Absolutely. I mean, I hear this a lot from students, universities are such a bureaucracy and, that it's complicated to be going through a lot of the paperwork and the processes. And I would agree. I mean, it's not that we can't have these processes. We need these processes, and these paperworks or forms are needed to kind of move processes along. But for some students, they might even just find that process a barrier in itself.
For sure.
And how do we navigate it? How do I try to work through what's required of me when I'm just in a place that I just can't do it? And so it's a very, again, different barrier than something that, we've identified that there's not an accessible entrance, let's make it accessible, done.
Yeah.
There's this ongoing and very personal barriers that sometimes it's difficult to anticipate. So a seemingly straightforward process can suddenly be identified as a significant barrier to receiving help. And so it's being able to anticipate
Mhm.
these needs can be difficult as
Absolutely.
well. But that's why we really require our students to be open and honest about these challenges. And if we can create a culture where they feel comfortable voicing these concerns, then it can help us to better understand what those systemic and procedural and even sometimes policy barriers are, and to be critical of them and reflect on them to try to make positive change when you can.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I think the stigma is still there, and then a lot of people still don't feel comfortable talking about whatever disabilities that they might they might have, whatever challenges they may be facing. Do you feel like that does affect the work that you do? People not really being able to voice what they need?
Yeah, and it's weird because again, like everything when talking about disability, there's always not one voice, as we were saying. So I think there's this population of students who are very vocal about what they need, what they want. They know their rights. They're demanding their rights. They're clear about what they need. They have strong advocates in terms of family support, other support. And I see it on one side where it doesn't appear to be a barrier because they're very confident and able and proactive and able to be proactive. And we do know that there are students, though, alternatively, who still experience, be it perceived or real discrimination related to their mental health disability. And I mean, I do see it, and so I understand that it is a real concern for some students. And all it takes is one negative interaction to really set somebody back. So maybe there's, one instructor or one support staff at an office or someone who maybe well-meaning might say something or do something that triggers somebody to feel unsafe in that situation, and then it can set somebody back.
Yeah, and I think it's a common theme in like mental health that you need to meet the person where they're at. It's difficult and it can be pretty complex as you mentioned. So say that a student, like a social worker is working with a student, or they have a case manager and they want to refer the student to accessibility services on campus. How do they start doing that? Is there a procedure?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. I think one of the barriers when we're talking about barriers, especially for mental health, is students often don't know that there is help out there within their university. They might know about counseling services and know about, say, their health services, but they often are not aware that offices like ours, Accessibility Services, can also help provide accommodations and supports for students with mental health disabilities, even suspected disabilities. And that's a big change too. And what I mean by that is that, so say a student with a physical disability, might have, I was born with this condition. It's part of my identity. I know I've been working with my high school teachers on this. I transitioned to university really smoothly. I knew where help was. For some students with a mental health challenge, it might not even be identified as a disability. So they're not knowing, what is this? What am I experiencing? Where do I go for help? And might feel that that offices like ours are not a place for them. And so we're really trying to help people understand that now, even if you don't have a diagnosis, even if you're just unsure, we can help with that. We can help them understand, okay, first of all, are you okay? Do you need help? Can we refer you somewhere? Secondly, let's talk about what you're experiencing and point you in the right directions to seek that help, the medical help that they might need. And then also develop interim accommodation plans. So we really encourage our campus partners, if they're working with a student that has identified a mental health disability or even is struggling and doesn't know where to go, we're a great first place to go. There's no wrong door. So if a student comes to us and it's, if we think they might need counseling, we can help them through that. So there's not a wrong choice. Every college and university has offices like ours, and usually they're quite easy. I would hope that they're easy to find on a website by doing, say, a simple search, and then just encouraging them, sitting with them even if needed, to maybe do that online application or to make that first phone call. I know at least within our university, just come into the door, make the phone call. We can help you with remove those barriers to get you on board, and we'll make sure that you get the help that you need.
Yeah, that's great. Just looping back to a point you made earlier, in that I think it's true that a lot of students going into university or college see accessibility services as actually more for people with physical disabilities.
Yes.
So how has your department, tried to change that perception?
It is hard to change that perception, and I think even if people know about it, oftentimes people don't self-identify. And I found that even in a lot of my past life, in a lot of the research that I was conducting and speaking with people with disabilities and talking about accommodations and talking about the disability community, and even persons who would have more, say, traditionally defined visible disabilities would still say, oh, well, no, I just have this. I'm not really, part of that. Yeah. So I think it goes, especially when it's an invisible disability. So even if they know about us, it's how do we help that barrier to self-identify with a label that maybe they don't identify with.
Because they don't necessarily want that to be part of their self-concept.
Exactly, or just see it in that way. So in terms of how do we promote, one, it's just a communication strategy in terms of, a new student materials, letting them know, welcome to university. Hey, there's an office for people with disabilities called AccessAbility that can help you. And then we've been really trying to explicitly state that includes permanent disabilities, temporary disabilities, suspected disabilities, and using that language and identifying mental health and putting it as a focus on our website in our communication, and trying as best we can to make connections with high schools, with guidance counselors, with other units on campus so that they can help spread the word. But I definitely believe that there's a lot more work that needs to be done on, as we said, both general awareness and then two, how do we help people to receive help without them feeling like they have to change their identity into something that they might not feel comfortable identifying with.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned high schools. So is there a difference between accessibility in high schools and in university?
Yes, that's a really good question. And again, it goes back to there's been such wonderful progression in the school system in terms of ensuring students have what they need to succeed. And so that concept is very similar. What might be different is just post-secondary so different. Just generally. And so you go to university and suddenly, wow, we really have 3 months to get all this work done. Everything happens so quickly. So a strategy that may have worked for them in high school, say, getting extensions, taking, extra time to do some tasks, can actually hurt a student sometimes in university when suddenly they're postponing things and it's almost like a credit card, you're spending something and now you're at the end of the term.
At some point you'll have to
and it's all
face
there.
it. Yeah.
And then you get incomplete, so now you're starting your next term with another course not finished. And so we have to help them understand that just life generally is very different. And then there's some differences in terms of trying to understand the essential requirements of some courses where it might make it a bit more difficult to facilitate some accommodations that they had in high school. We have to tweak them differently to ensure that we're still meeting the academic rigor of a university, and that all students have a right to access university. But there's also essential requirements of university in terms of their standard that we don't see in the JK to 12 world. So it's always trying to negotiate these things. And so I think, again, it goes back to open conversations between the student and in their preparation with offices like ours and onboarding of understanding what might be different. So funding requirements are different. So the different documentation might be needed. So we just really encourage families to get started early. Connect with the office early, check the website early, and to make sure you're prepared for that transition. Yeah,
it's a big transition
for any student. Yeah, for any parent. It is.
Absolutely. What would you like to see moving forward for accessibility services on your campus?
Yeah.
What would you ask for?
I mean, in an ideal world, the idea is kind of, I wish our offices didn't need to exist. Right. And I mean, I know that's not necessarily a realistic piece, but the idea would be that campus communities are so accessible that accommodations are not required. So in an ideal world, that would be it. So, education is so, and I mean, you would love it if there was universal learning designs and, physical barriers were removed and, offices like ours had, the capacity to really provide that really close support, ongoing connections as we would like. And even if that happened, with the complexity of disability, there's still always going to be a need for an accommodation, because what works for one might not work for another.
Yes, of course.
And so that wish is kind of taken away. But I still think the spirit of that wish of seeing accessibility and seeing the capacity building for people with disabilities as a campus responsibility, and really taking it from these one-off, okay, let's support this one student with this one course, this one student with this one course. What could we do to really embed accessibility and inclusion within the campus? Yeah. And that requires culture change, and that requires collaboration of campus partners to really work together for the same mission. And when you see it happening, it's really exciting. And so I don't think that's a far off dream. I think that's something that universities are really eager to engage in, is seeing wellness as a holistic responsibility across campus.
Yeah, that's certainly something that a lot of institutions are moving towards, like the idea of, it's physical well-being, it's mental well-being, it's all seeing a student as a whole, and also not just a student, but you can't think about student mental health without thinking about faculty mental health, staff mental health. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is about those relationships, and our office is really aware of that. I'm imagining most are. I can only speak for mine. But when we're talking to faculty, we, although we have to come in sometimes a little bit strong in terms of, no, this is a required accommodation, we have to do something. We're flexible in terms of finding an alternative if needed, but something has to happen. And when we hear the concerns from faculty members, I know within our office, those are not dismissed. They are understood, and while we're also trying to work towards creating campus communities, part of that is ensuring that faculty and staff are equipped with knowledge, with training, with emotional supports, with systemic supports that are going to make this possible. And so I'm always saying, no, our office, we're a faculty resource. We're here to support you with your duty to accommodate. And that can't happen if instructors are not feeling part of that process and supported and encouraged. And if they're not supported and encouraged, how are they supposed to really help a student feel the same way? Absolutely. So it is a holistic approach is required, not just for students, but as you're saying, for staff and faculty, which can make it more complex. But it also just really, when you come at it from that culture change perspective, it also makes more sense, because it's, again, building that community that supports everybody.
Absolutely.
Not just students.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. It was a great conversation. And if you really like this video, please share it with your coworkers and subscribe to our newsletter by going on to our website, campusmentalhealth.ca. If you're interested in other news, ideas, resources to do with campus mental health, also all of that is available on our website. Thank you for watching.